Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you to our coffee break together with Nikolaus. Today we are talking about Japan, HR topics. And this week is so thrilling for me because we had the Japanese Day in Düsseldorf with, I think, almost 1 million people coming from all over here. And we had a wonderful weekend, a great possibility to see the culture, to experience the art. And today we will also have the economic day. So we will focus on the new innovations and the techniques of Japan. So this week is very thrilling for us. And as you can see from Mr. Scholz, Japan, the most reliable country in Asia, I think this is definitely worth to have a coffee break. Nicholas, by the way, do you have also a coffee break, or do you drink classical tea?
Thank you for inviting me, Michael. This is a Japanese thermos, and I can already ask the people in the room, in the virtual room, whether they know what this is called in Japanese. It's called mahobin, which means a witchcraft bottle or a magic bottle, because it's so. And I can only recommend everybody buying a Japanese thermos, because they really are the best, and they will keep it cold or warm for hours.
That's true. And I think magic bottle is a good keyword for us, because you are doing consulting business with regards to intercultural training with your firm. Maybe you briefly could introduce you by yourself, and then we start in our coffee break.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Nikolaus Mach-Hour. I'm the head of the German office of Japan Consulting Office. I'm also the vice president for global strategy. I've seen some familiar faces in the room already, in the virtual room. So Japan Consulting Office has offices all over Europe, but also in the US and in Asia. We do consulting and lots of training and big events and keynote speech and all kinds of things for mostly, of course, on the topic of Japanese working with non-Japanese and non-Japanese working with Japanese. And this, of course, could include all the nations in the world. And we do have many, many global customers, many global sessions. We support more than 500 companies, all the big names, many small names. So anybody I think you know or you don't know, or which that is powering your iPhone, or that you're drinking or eating. So there's a lot of overlap with the daily life in Germany, I think.
Absolutely, and I can deeply recommend your consulting office. We also experienced that it's very useful for building the bridges, and that's what we want to do with our Japan desk and as a law firm, of course. But it's more than only consulting about law, only about consulting about HR issues. It's really going into the Japanese employment society. And I'm wondering sometimes, why is this society so unique, so special? We have so many legal examples coming in the news which are not so good, like, so many overtime, karoshi, they are killing them by self, they are sleeping all over the meetings. So there are so many irritations, but there are also very great number of upsides, like planning, reliability. And that's why I think we need some explanation, and we need a coffee break. So Nicholas, what do you think from an intercultural training perspective? What is, I think, the most important thing? Is it creating awareness? Is it avoiding irritations?
It's a very good question. I think there are potentially many different building blocks. I mean, the main focus we're trying to give is communication, to actually already, or in the first place, enable people to talk to each other, meaning, in the case of Germany, whereas if we say Germany, we have so many customers that have 30, 40 nationalities in their office in Düsseldorf or in Köln or in Munich. So even talking about Germany, we're basically talking about Europe, or we're talking about the world. But I think communication is really the starting block, I would say. And then a lot of awareness about the background. I mean, let me ask you a question, because I'm not a lawyer and you have much more experience here. But very often when we ask Japanese expatriates, we train lots of expatriates from all kinds of companies, and they come to Germany, come to Europe, they come to the US, and then we ask them, what are you? What's your specialty? And they say, actually, I'm doing this and that, I'm doing all kinds of things. And then we say, but what does it say in your job contract? And then they say, job contract. And they say, maybe, my job contract. It basically says we hire you to do work, or they say Job contract. Do I have a job contract? I don't know. I can't even remember, which is crazy talk for Germans. Why is that?
Yes, that's really fascinating. So they're starting with, after graduating of the university, they start with the Japanese company, and maybe they have only a one-pager with welcome you to our company, very, very, very small. Sometimes even the family has to be reliable for their performance and for their trustworthy overall. So they have signed to a penalty if the employee makes a mistake. So this is very interesting and fascinating. And then they don't have any job description. They are not talking about I'm hired as in the HR department and I'm only doing HR issues. I'm hired in the sales department. No, they are more flexible, and that's very fascinating from our side, because this is really untypical in German. And as you correctly said, we have to explain the differences in this respect. Communication. I think it's very difficult for Japanese to learn English and German. What's your perception in this respect? What are the most important mistakes we should avoid when it comes to communication with Japanese?
That's a very good point. I would have to say that during the 30 years I've been doing this, basically, there is a lot of change, and I do it since maybe 10 years ago. I think there's a new generation. It's not the whole generation, but there is a growing number of young Japanese, and not so young Japanese anymore, that have been outside of Japan for a year of studies or host family, and they speak normal English. So it's basically the same as we would send our kids to Japan. Japanese is as difficult for them as English. As for us, as English is for them. So I think there is a change coming also in universities now. There is a bigger percentage of really hearing comprehension in tests. In the past, it was only multiple choice and just grammar and maybe some vocabulary, but it was never about speaking. This is now slowly changing. Nevertheless, the people we work with, and especially the people we might work with on a mid-managerial or maybe executive level, often, not always, often, but might not see English as their, as their main objective. That it's just a tool. I somehow have to get it done for me. Sometimes it's like working using Excel. I think everybody uses Excel, but only a few people really like Excel and they want to get better at Excel. And I feel that in Japan, sometimes, especially people of my age or our age, maybe sometimes see English of something I have to use. I have to get my point across, but then I don't want to delve. I don't want to get better at it. So what we have to pay attention to, I think, is to really read the signs, whether somebody's really following, because I think you've already, I guess, have been many, many times in situations where even a managing director or an executive of a company was still behaving very Japanese in a sense that something was explained. They keep nodding, maybe turning their head slightly, and then any questions? No, it's fine. And then they leave the session and they call you later, or they write an email with the same question. So it's not just about it's not just about position. There's a few things we can do by blaming ourselves. If we always say, probably it's my mistake, or even saying that, you can even say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking too fast. I'm sure my English might be confusing. Is that correct? Do you have any questions, to build this golden bridge, as we say in German?
I think that's a very useful information for everyone, because my experience, you have to be very clear and to keep it very simple. This is maybe because Japan likes all the simple stuff in the culture, but if you make explanations, if you make a legal statement, always keep it down to earth, very simple to understand, and then detailed explanation can be followed later. Maybe because of the English language.
That's one thing. Also, I think one is even, when we talk about law or HR, if you are working in a company here, either it's a subsidiary of a Japanese company or you have Japanese colleagues over there, but you are the headquarter. Sometimes you may be dealing with legal, colleagues in the law department or HR department, wherever, and you might expect them to be specialists, but of course they have one or two lawyers, but sometimes really the knowledge base is a bit lower than you might expect So you really have to keep it simple, and then basically teach them a bit of what it's about.
Exactly. So when addressing and you mentioned those typical meetings. So the Germans participate with 1 or 2 participants. And I thank you for the question. That's a good. By the way, please use your question button. I come later and answer this. We take these questions, but use the question button and ask. This is very active here for a coffee break. But let's go to the meeting. So we came with 2 people, Japan delegation with 10 people, and then the meeting is like nodding, and it's a very warm and nice atmosphere. But sometimes we have a kind of feeling we make mistakes. For instance, where should who should we address? How should we talk in those meetings? Should we speak very fast? Should we have an agenda and just stick to the agenda? How should we prepare this?
That's a good point. I mean, one thing we have to remind ourselves of is that Japan usually, and I think it's slowly changing, but like really in a glacial pace, is a country that really doesn't like surprises, to be very honest. So everything has to be planned, which would mean that very often if you go somewhere, have a discussion, whether it's internally with your colleagues or with the customer or with the supplier, whatever, you have an agenda. You might even have sent your presentation in advance so that they can translate it. And I think really stick to the agenda. And if there are some sticking points, there's something you want to bring up, consider not doing it in the session itself, because it's also, the face topic is still is still huge. We might think, even somebody speaks very good English and so on and so forth, but if you're in a more Japanese environment with other Japanese sitting there, you can still embarrass people, by pointing something out. So I think I would rather take it out of this official setting and then maybe discuss it on one-on-one later.
Is it what would you say is it's the biggest challenge that we always have to consider, not to lose the faces and to create this wa atmosphere, as the Japanese says, this
harmony,
good harmony and feeling. Is it the biggest challenge for us Germans or for Americans?
For Germans, yeah. I think if we define harmony, and that's an interesting point, because that's awareness. You use the word awareness, and I think awareness is the point that we have to keep reminding ourselves of. And this goes for you, I think, probably even longer experience with Japan than I do. Even we have to remind ourselves, sometimes we're using words, but do we mean the same thing? So if we use harmony in a more German, Western setting, or especially German setting, I think we would say we are bringing something to the table, we're discussing it, now I know where everybody's coming from, and now we're one step closer to harmony, which is, of course, what? In Japan, traditionally, harmony is the starting point. So it's really not the invisibility of open dissent or fighting or whatever. So harmony in Japan doesn't mean that there aren't big problems we have to discuss, but they shouldn't boil over, so to speak.
Exactly.
I think that's a key point we have to understand, because then it's not so much like, oh, nobody's telling the truth or they're all lying. But if we say face very often is more important than just hammering on the facts, then we understand in Germany it's very much facts are more important than feelings. I'm sorry you feel that way, but at the end of the day, this is the number, this is the figure. Get off my back.
I think this is a typical efficient German meeting, is that there's a discussion and we see the problems, and then we go out and are very happy that we have all the problems on the table and have all opinions here, and then we can solve and work. And this is a little bit different from Japanese. Maybe this is connected to the so-called nemawashi principle. This is a very fascinating word, going around the roots of a tree. Maybe you can a little bit elaborate on this.
That's it. I mean, what I'm going to try to do is start with the principle and then slowly tie it over into the changes in Japan, because in my time with Japanese culture and business culture, I think there have been certain very big changes, and yet another very big change or change over to a new system where we don't know where it's going yet, has of course been the pandemic. So traditionally, in Japan, you have these teams. People work more in teams of generalists that try to really interact and connect with each other. And you have a boss, and if we understand that the boss himself or herself, very often mostly him, might have been rotated in from another position, he can't be the super specialist in this field. So they very often would just hand out some instruction, change this or solve this problem, okay? And then the team has to spring into action and come up with workable solutions. But that means that the team in an Nemawashi process, which is not so much sitting in a meeting once again, because in a meeting you have all kinds of opinions, but more one-on-one talks, telephone, going for a cigarette, going for a coffee next to the coffee maker, slowly discusses within the team, but also potentially with other departments, to hammer out some kind of draft that then they can bring up to the management. Now, and this is the traditional Nemawashi, where we should try to include ourselves as much as possible, either internally, but even if we're working with suppliers, so try to create relationships that you can lean on. But now bringing it over to the new normal, this is very, very interesting. I mean, everything has been turned upside down in Germany, in the rest of the world too. But in Japan, we have to imagine that in this teamwork style of having much bigger teams than here, honestly speaking, bigger departments, people working much longer, it's a strong system of being at work, or has been a strong system of being at work, long hours, showing that you're committed. Maybe the output per man hour wasn't as high, honestly speaking, but at least you were there, you were visible. And honestly speaking, I think you might still remember that whenever we talk to Japanese executives or management about working from home before the pandemic, people almost had an allergic reaction. No.
Not possible.
We can't do that. We can't. Nobody knows what they're doing at home. But of course, the pandemic has forced Japanese business culture to now move into that direction. And this is such a big shift. And there are many systems they're trying to do, like, for example, NTT, I think, is trying to have these hub offices where people can just go to this or that office and then they just do their work there. How this works, whether it will work, we will see. But I think for the first time ever, there has been this at least temporary breaking up of these teams, or at least spreading them out in location, working from home, working from different places. But now the question is, how do you do in Nemawashi? How can you meet somebody at the coffee maker? How do you? These things are still being negotiated, and I feel younger people already, even before the pandemic, were more open to discussion. Honestly speaking, or to even telling their boss, "I'm not really a fan of this." But the more digital it gets, and the more remote it gets, there need to be new ways to do that. Honestly speaking.
Yeah, and I think this is the system. Also for me, it was the most fascinating thing to experience during the pandemic situation. Since, in my view, the Japanese working society at least adapted, changed a little bit. I'm not sure whether this will last and whether we continue this over the next years, but at least we saw that suddenly everyone was able to work from home. Suddenly we discussed more flexibility for families in a broader way. Of course, there was a big discussion about work 5.0 before the pandemic, with all the inclusion, with all the problems about overtime, so big law books I have seen about this. But this was more maybe discussion first, and
a vision, maybe.
Yeah, a vision maybe. And it was always so, we have to think about, we are not so sure whether we can do this. but now, and that's my question. So is it that the Japanese society becomes more westernized, or is it still a challenge from your perspective? What do you say?
I would say, that's the definition. What's westernization? I would say that the Japanese society, compared to the Japanese society from 10, 20 years ago, is more individualistic, especially younger people. That's one thing.
Yes.
Does this mean that they will be working like the people in the US from tomorrow? I don't think so. But what we see is, I've just looked at a few statistics and asking the people, young recruits at companies, and we remember that very often, I mean, it is changing, it has been changing for a long time. Very often people that are full-time employees at these big companies and also mid-tier companies would join on April 1st in these big ceremonies, and everybody would start from the same starting line, so to speak. And in the past, you would have heard stuff like, I'm so thankful that they let me work here, basically. Whereas now you ask them in surveys, and they say, I don't know, how long do you think you will stay in this company? Maybe only 3 years. And this is would have been crazy 10, 20 years ago to open, even say it, even if you thought it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a slow change over to a different mindset. And I read something which I found interesting. I don't know if anybody here in this room plays video games, but they said that in the past, Japanese had more like a Dragon Quest approach. Dragon Quest is a very Japanese video game where you basically have to do one task,
recommendable,
move along, and then you get to the end. Whereas now they're more in a Pokemon mindset, which you might go here and then you might go here, which is much more Western. It's not as Western as the US, where you really have to change all the time.
Yeah.
But even now, and I think that's something question for you. Very often when we talk to experts or to look at also publication from METI and stuff like that, it's about allowing people to have a side job, which is something I think we don't really have. We don't have that much for people that work, 30, 40, working somewhere. Why would they have like a side job? I think this is something that is really being permitted now. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so there are two remarks. First, I also agree there's a new change in the working environment. So if you see now the traditional headquarters, they are creating new labor atmospheres, new co-working spaces. So this is really fascinating. I just saw on LinkedIn fascinating posts of Mitsui, for instance, which is a traditional company, and now they changed their headquarters in a very fascinating way. But indeed, those side activities, this is, on the one hand, it's a signal for more flexibility in the labor market, for more flexibility of mindset of Japanese, but it's also sometimes used to get rid of some elderly people, which is not a nice thing from our perspective, of course, to allow them a higher degree of flexibility to go to other companies. But still, we have a really great movement here. And for instance, we are now participating in an ESG call organized by the Tokyo legal societies from the lawyers. It's of course boring lawyer stuff, but still we are now discussing in traditional law firms the social aspects of working together, how to have maternity leave, how to have parental leave, how to do more flexibility regarding nursing kids or even helping elderly people at home. I think this is the big challenge, and of course we see the aging society and all those problems which are well known in Japan. But I think that's something which creates a new working atmosphere. And coming back to the intercultural training, do you think we need to focus more on those issues to help the Japanese people here in Germany, and of course and help the German or the Europeans going to Japan to understand the really difficult working atmosphere, the difficult change in this respect?
Yeah, I think it's never a bad idea to look, in the deeper, lower levels of the cultural iceberg, so to speak. What assumptions are made. I mean, maybe two comments, regarding the question of aging society and how are the companies changing. We had many sessions, free events on the role of women, changing role of women in Japanese companies, and we had some very fascinating interviews with female board members, stuff like that. So there is a lot of change, and I feel that, honestly speaking, change now is coming more from companies. Of course, there's a lot of pressure from the society.
Exactly. And
companies are doing lots of things like letting people go, especially mothers, leave at 4, for example, or having childcare, or even, some of our customers, big customers, where the HR manager, like a Japanese male HR manager, young guy, writes a company-wide email saying, we had our first baby boy or whatever. I'm going to take my parental leave for 1 week, or which is really, you could take actually 1 year in Japan legally, but nobody would do it. But now they have like this the lighthouse guy basically setting the example, of course, with the blessing of the management. And now it is happening. I mean, we do see, and I think you've seen this too, a lot more, how can I say, emphasis on the individual. And every time you look online or you go to Japan, you see more featuring of young people in big companies, and also featuring them not just this is the newest Toyota man and he will become maybe president one day. It's much more, no, he or she is working, they just joined, they're a specialist, or they're working on this specific field, and their hobby is shining shoes.
Exactly.
Their hobby is playing guitar, which is really interesting to do that openly. So I think there's a big mindset change, but we of course, we need to help them and we need to understand what we're talking about.
Exactly. It's of course always connected with also marketing and hiring aspects. But I think indeed there is a certain movement, and this is why it's so fascinating to have a cup of coffee about Japan. But having a cup of coffee, my is almost empty, unfortunately. I would recommend that we take away something. What can we learn from Japan? Well, should Japanese always learn from our side? Can we?
No, of course. No.
Yeah.
I mean, we have been learning from each other for a long time. What I would say is this ESG and this more long-term oriented planning. I mean, there's one word that you surely know, which is called Sampo Yoshi, which means that, from hundreds of years ago, there was this idea that when you make a sale as a merchant, for example, it should benefit three parties. Of course, the customer, who is of course a god in Japan, then yourself and your staff, but also the community, and that is what the question now. And this is, I mean, it's a never-ending conversation, and this is why we would really encourage you to talk to your Japanese clients, partners, customers over a cup of tea or a beer, or whatever you might want to have, about this topic. How do you define community? Is it the community at large, or is the community made up of individuals? So there's a lot of things we have to consider here.
Yeah. I think what maybe HR could learn, and we of course we are in such a close connection that we talk a lot about Japan and into the cultural training, is trust and reliability. Oh, what a complicated word. What is your perception on trust? And
I think that's a very good point. The trust, and sometimes that things take longer and that things need to be, how can I say, coming back to Nimawashi, which is of course from gardening, and you cannot just yank the tree out of the ground, put it somewhere else, but you have to dig deep, and then you have to make a change, because we do know, and I think everybody here who has had some experience with Japan way of doing something, that the run up to changing something really takes forever, because all these parties have to be asked, and there's so many people that have to give their opinion and so on and so forth. But once it's decided, you can change things super quickly, because then you have basically a process that you just have to roll out. So I think I think, as we could say in German, dicke Bretter bohren, try to concentrate on one topic, create trust. Don't always just say, we want this, we want that, but keep the information flowing, and then make your case, and, make your case again and again. And don't just say, oh, no, I'm taking my ball, I'm going home because you're not listening to me. You just need some endurance, so to speak.
Yes, and I think that's the most fascinating aspect of Japanese companies. There's a high level of reliability and a high level of trust. So if we open our mindset, if we go into this fascinating culture with all the upsides and all the downsides, of course, as every culture has, we can learn and can gain a lot for ourselves. And maybe this is too Japanese, but also for the society a little bit. No?
I mean, that's a bit. I think that's a growing. I mean, it's always been a concern, but it's a growing concern now that everybody, even looking at Davos right this week. Yeah. It's getting away from this quarterly. Hopefully, I mean, maybe it's just empty promises, but going away from this quarterly profit to, okay, what does it mean in the long run? How do we benefit community? One thing I wanted to say before we leave everybody. You mentioned cultural bridges, and I forgot this, but I'm going to send you a booklet we made together with Toyota, which is called Working Successfully Across Cultures, with some very interesting tips. So I'm going to give some to you. I'm going to actually send some to you for your customers, so they can pick it up, or they can just contact us on LinkedIn, or just hit me up, and then we're going to send it to them for free. But this is very nice. Also, some Japanese in there, by the way. So it's in English and in Japanese.
Oh, that's very good for my training in Japanese. Domo arigatou gozaimasu. But I think that's a good closing remark for us. So we, of course, we could have not only a coffee but also a beer and continue with communication today evening in an izakaya style restaurant. But Nikolaus, I'm so grateful for your really nice input, and I hope that this cup of coffee was very inspiring for me, and that it was also inspiring for the audience. Please contact us, contact him, of course, in case of any questions. I can highly recommend digging into this wonderful culture and going to Japan as soon as we can. So thank you very much.
Now it's possible again. I think now
I think we can.
I'll see you in Japan next time.
Yes, we will see us in Japan and have the coffee at Starbucks.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.